Namaskar and welcome to Global Scan. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. This is your one-stop destination for a roundup of all the major international developments of the week. Gun laws and control in the United States, its center of public debate again as another case of shooting rocks America. In other developments, we look at how WHO is pushing for a new international treaty for pandemic preparedness and response, the 17th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting of the Asian neighbors. Britain celebrates relief from COVID restrictions with tennis, and the much-awaited clearing of the Suez Canal. All that and more in Global Scan. Let's get started with the top stories. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar addresses 17th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting via video conferencing, highlights importance of connectivity, security, cooperation, disaster management and tourism. Another mass shooting rocks United States. 4 dead, 2 wounded in mass shooting south of Los Angeles. It's the third deadly mass shooting in the US in less than a month. US President Joe Biden unveils $2.3 trillion plan to re-engineer the country's infrastructure over the next 8 years. The move, called a once-in-a-generation investment in America, plans to transform America's infrastructure. Seven prominent Hong Kong Democrats, including media tycoon Jimmy Lai and father of democracy Martin Lee, found guilty of unlawful assembly. They were accused of taking part in peaceful protests in August 2019 when anti-government protests roiled the financial hub. And President of France Emmanuel Macron orders third national lockdown as COVID-19 infections rise. Described the situation in France as delicate. Restrictions that are already in place for more than a week in Paris and some northern and southern regions will apply to the entire country for at least a month, starting 3rd April. Let's now get started with news from the Americas. 4 people, including a child, were killed on Wednesday evening in another mass shooting at an office complex in California, United States. It marks the 3rd mass shooting in the US in just 2 weeks, coming after incidents at Atlanta and Colorado. The shocking incident has revived the intense debate about gun control and restrictions on assault weapons. President Biden has urged the Congress to swiftly pass gun control laws and also indicated executive actions to stop mass violence.
While US was trying to move on after 2 deadly shootings, another mass shooting rocked the United States. Scars of Atlanta and Colorado shooting are still afresh for families of those who lost their loved ones. Just when they were trying to divert themselves, this bloodshed occurred in the city of Orange, about 30 miles southeast of downtown Los Angeles. This marks 3rd deadly mass shooting in the United States in less than a month. On Wednesday, police in the Californian city of Orange reported a shooting on March 31st with multiple victims at the scene, including fatalities. And local news media outlets said 4 people were killed before a suspect was arrested. From mocking to insult to killing, all are on the rise in the United States.
There are fatalities on scene. We do have 4 fatalities on scene. We do have 1 injured person who was transported to the hospital, along with our suspect who was also transported to the hospital.
The shooting erupted in a 2-storied office building that opens onto an inner courtyard ringed by several businesses. The larger neighborhood consists of homes, apartments and other commercial properties. The police statement said an officer-involved shooting had occurred and that the situation had since been stabilized with no further threat to the public. Reacting on Twitter to Wednesday's events in Orange, California Governor Gavin Newsom called the latest bloodshed horrifying and heartbreaking. The US was rocked by 2 mass shootings in March. 8 people, many of them Asian Americans, were killed inside spas in Atlanta, Georgia on 16th of March. 2 women of Asian descent were among the dead there, along with a white woman and a white man. The first happened at Young's Asian Massage in Ackworth, Cherokee County. 2 people died at the scene and 3 were taken to hospital, where 2 more died. Less than an hour later, police were called to a robbery in progress at the Gold Spa in northeast Atlanta. As they arrived at the location, officers located 3 females deceased inside the location from apparent gunshot wounds. Just few days later, 10 people were shot dead in a Colorado grocery store on 22nd of March. President Joe Biden revived the intense US debate about gun control, calling for restrictions on assault weapons. He urged Congress to swiftly pass gun control laws and may take action on his own to stop mass violence.
We're working very closely with the state and local law enforcement officials, and they're going to keep me updated as they learn more. You're going to ask me to speculate, understandably, you'd ask me to speculate about what happened, why it happened, and I'm not going to do that now because we don't have all the information. Not until I have all the facts.
Spokeswoman Jen Psaki told reporters that Biden is considering a range of executive actions to try to stop gun violence. Such actions do not require the approval of Congress. Biden, who took office in January, pledged during his presidential campaign to enact gun safety measures, but has devoted the first months to distributing coronavirus stimulus and vaccines. DD India.
Let's now take a look at how widespread the challenge of gun violence is in the United States and the background to gun control as well through the means of data and history. If you look at the data first, America is known to be a country with the most lax control on gun ownership in the world. How? We'll just find out. Let's go to the next point. We're looking at the highest civilian gun ownership globally. That's what America is infamous for. How many guns are we talking about? We're talking about 12 firearms, 12 guns for every 10 civilians. So in clear terms, the guns outnumber the people in America. Also in terms of how guns are related to more homicide, 6 times higher homicides than any other developed nations is what America is also known for. Now, gun control gun control laws are rooted in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. So those who defend it, for them, Second Amendment becomes very crucial. Let's move on and look at some data of the last 5 years, in particular from 2017 onwards. In 2017, we're looking at 11 instances of shooting and 117 casualties. Now, we're looking at data where at least 3 people or more killings have happened. In 2018, the number increases to 12 cases of shooting and 80 people are killed in these cases of mass shooting. Coming to 2019, 10 instances of mass shooting are reported. 73 people lose their lives in these unfortunate instances. And looking at 2020, the year of the COVID pandemic, still there were 2 instances of mass shooting that were reported and 9 people lost their lives. In 2021, already 2 cases of shooting were reported before the one that has just taken place, and 18 people were killed. So we see how widespread is the challenge of mass shooting and gun violence in the United States. Let us now look at some history. In 1968, the assassination of President Kennedy, a Gun Control Act, that's GCA, is passed, putting widespread restriction on age and criminal background on who can purchase guns in America. Coming to 1980, we see the Comprehensive Crime Control Act and Armed Career Criminal Act as well come into place, where is a greater punishment, a longer sentence for those breaking laws related to gun violence. 1993, we're looking at Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. In that, we see that people who are in the business of selling guns, they have now the power to do a more thorough background check to prevent gun violence. But all of it hasn't seen much impact in the United States, as we saw in the data. So what is Biden's proposal all about? He talks about a common sense gun law reforms, and that's also the vision of the Democrats by and large. Let's see the finer points in it. Let's move on to the next point. We're talking about Biden's proposal as far as gun control in the US is concerned. He's talking about a more thorough background check on all gun sales. Who are the people who are buying these guns, who are keeping these guns? What is their background? A more thorough check is what the president is talking about. banning of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. These are weapons used in warlike situation. These should not be in the hands of the civilians, is what the president believes. Eliminating also immunity for gun manufacturers who, for the profit motive, are overlooking laws and selling assault weapons and other such deadly weapons to civilians, leading to the cases of mass killings and shootings, as we just saw in the data that we looked at. Let us now move on to our next story. US President Joe Biden introduced a $2 trillion plan to overhaul and upgrade the nation's infrastructure, calling it a transformational effort that could create a more resilient, innovative economy in the world. The proposal's combination of spending and tax credits would translate into development and repair of major road, bridge and pipeline infrastructure in the US, besides other projects intended to create millions of jobs in the short run and also strengthen the American competitiveness in the long run. The focus is also on accelerating the fight against climate change and promote racial equality in the economy.
It's a major boost to America's economy. US President Joe Biden is leaving no stone unturned in getting America back on track. President Joe Biden on 31st March called for sweeping use of government power to reshape the world's largest economy and counter China's rise in a $2 trillion plus proposal that has been met with swift political resistance. His move is aimed at reigniting America's economic growth by upgrading its crumbling infrastructure and tackling climate change.
It's not a plan that tinkers around the edges. It's a once-in-a-generation investment in America, unlike anything we've seen or done since we built the interstate highway system and the space race decades ago. We have to move now, because I'm convinced that if we act now, in 50 years, people are going to look back and say, this was the moment that America won the future. What I'm proposing is a one-time capital investment of roughly $2 trillion in America's future, spread largely over 8 years. It will generate historic job growth, historic economic growth, help businesses to compete internationally, create more revenue as well. They are among the highest value investments we can make in the nation, investing in our infrastructure. But put another way, failing to make these investments adds to our debt and effectively puts our children at a disadvantage relative to our competitors. That's what crumbling infrastructure does. And our infrastructure is crumbling. We rank 13th in the world.
Biden's second multi-trillion-dollar legislative proposal in 2 months in office is aimed at providing support to an economy walloped by the coronavirus pandemic. It also promised to shore up labor unions and the country's resilience to climate change, both long-sought liberal goals. The recently enacted $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package, Biden's infrastructure initiative, would give the federal government a bigger role in the U.S. economy than it has had in generations, accounting for 20% or more of annual output. Another economic proposal Biden will release in April could add another $2 trillion to the total price tag. Biden's team believes a government-directed effort to strengthen the economy is the best way to contend with increased competition and a national security threat posed by China. DD India.
And let's now look at news from Europe. WHO is pushing for a new international treaty for pandemic preparedness and response. It would look for a comprehensive multi-sectoral approach to strengthen national, regional and global capacities and resilience to future pandemics. 23 countries see this as an opportunity for the world to come together as global community for peaceful cooperation that extends beyond this pandemic. Here's more.
The world is battling COVID-19. Countries across the world are leaving no stone unturned in the fight against the virus. Leaders of 23 countries and the World Health Organization on Tuesday back to drawing up an international treaty that would help deal with future health emergencies like the coronavirus pandemic by tightening rules on sharing information.
Without an internationally coordinated, all of government, all of society, One Health approach to pandemic preparedness and response, we remain vulnerable. It has shown how much we need a universal commitment to basic public health principles as the foundation for our work to prevent, detect, and respond to epidemic and pandemic threats. The idea behind the proposal for such a treaty is to systematically tackle the gaps exposed by COVID-19. There is a problem in sharing information, so it can address that in sharing data. And then there is a problem in sharing the pathogen, and that could be addressed through the treaty. And there is a problem in sharing technology, or like vaccines. We are now confronted with vaccine equity. And this could also be addressed in the treaty.
A joint WHO-China study on the virus's origin said that it had probably been transmitted from bats to humans through another animal, and that a lab leak was extremely unlikely as the cause. Dr. Ghebreyesus said data was withheld from WHO experts who went to China to research its origins.
But because of the strong suspicion of certain bat species being the host of this virus, and having found other relatively close virus strains to SARS-CoV-2 in the region, also in Southeast Asia in general, where these bats are living, is a strong indication that that's where the source is. But we're still working on finding the exact traceback of the virus before Wuhan. This is work in progress again, and we all have to be patient and again support the logic of our work, which is to start from where the first case were identified, detected in Wuhan, and looking at that event, that phase, that environment, and then expanding the environment and the studies starting from that point and radiating out of it, following the leads that individual studies will give us.
The United States and 13 other countries expressed concerns on Tuesday that the World Health Organization report on the origins of the novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19 was delayed and lacked access to complete data on Wuhan, China, according to a joint statement.
Well, they have not been transparent. They have not provided underlying data. That certainly doesn't qualify as cooperation. The analysis performed to date from our experts, their concern is that there isn't additional support for one hypothesis. It doesn't lead us to any closer of an understanding or greater knowledge than we had 6 to 9 months ago about the origin. It also doesn't provide us guidelines or steps, recommended steps on how we should prevent this from happening in the future, and those are imperative.
China refused to provide raw data on early COVID-19 cases to the WHO-led team. One of the team's investigators has already said, potentially complicating efforts to understand how the global pandemic began. The country's joint statement supported further studies of animals to find how the virus was introduced to humans, and called for renewed commitment from the WHO and member countries to access, transparency and timeliness. DD India.
And let's now shift focus to news from Asia. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar addressed the 17th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting via video conferencing. He highlighted the importance of connectivity, strategic cooperation, disaster management and tourism for the region. The sub-regional grouping comprising 7 countries of South and Southeast Asia, that's India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Myanmar and Thailand, is an important component of India's Act East and Neighbourhood First policy.
The Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, BIMSTEC, has grown into an important sub-regional grouping for South and Southeast Asia. The region is home to around 22% of the global population and had sustained an average growth rate of above 6% until the global pandemic. The confluence of South and Southeast Asia is strategically important for India's Northeast. At the 17th BIMSTEC ministerial meeting held via video conference, India emphasized the importance of good connectivity in harnessing the region's economic potential.
I'm delighted that the member states have finalized a BIMSTEC master plan for transport connectivity which is expected to be adopted at the 5th BIMSTEC summit. It would be an important step towards fulfilling the aspirations of the people of our region for better connectivity and integration.
BIMSTEC member states have finalized a master plan for transport connectivity with a vision to promote seamless connectivity between and across the member countries through different modes of transport. Under the master plan, 267 projects of construction, expansion and modernization of transport infrastructure have been identified, of which 137 projects will enhance connectivity in the Bay of Bengal region. But the grouping is also collectively responding to the common concerns of terrorism, transnational crime, drug trafficking and disaster management.
I'm glad to note that the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation in Combating International Terrorism, Transnational Organized Crime and Illicit Drug Trafficking has come into force last month, and BIMSTEC Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters has been finalized for signing at the 5th Summit. These conventions will provide a robust legal basis to further strengthen our cooperation in this sector. Disaster management is another important area of collaboration among BIMSTEC countries having similar geoclimatic conditions. I'm happy to inform that the BIMSTEC Center for Weather and Climate, being hosted in India, is fully functional with the state-of-the-art facilities to provide disaster early warnings.
Dr. Jaishankar noted that post-pandemic, BIMSTEC will need to build up intra-regional tourism. The cultural wealth of each member state is clearly an untapped economic resource. India attaches great importance to BIMSTEC, as can be seen by the fact that BIMSTEC leaders were the guests of honor at the swearing-in of the Modi 2.0 government in 2019. 6 sectors: trade, technology, energy, transport, tourism and fisheries form the backbone of cooperation among member countries. The scope has since grown enormously, with the grouping forming an important component of India's Act East policy. The meeting takes place at a time when global attention is on concerns about atrocities by the Myanmar junta against the pro-democracy protesters. While each nation has expressed their concerns individually on the matter, BIMSTEC as a grouping in its charter refrains from discussing domestic issues of any member state or even bilateral issues between any 2 member states. Bureau Report, DD India.
7 prominent Hong Kong Democrats were found guilty on 1st of April of unauthorized assembly. The 7 persons included media tycoon Jimmy Lai and father of democracy Martin Lee. They were accused of taking part in an unauthorized assembly on 18th August 2019 when anti-government protests roiled the financial hub. DD India's Richard Kimber reports from Hong Kong.
Inside the media headquarters of the Apple Daily newspaper, owned by tycoon Jimmy Lai, one of the most well-known and outspoken critics of the Hong Kong and Beijing governments in recent years. He's one of 8 activists who have been convicted of organising and taking part in an unauthorised assembly that took place back in 2019 amid many months of anti-government public protests. Now, what happened on this occasion was an estimated almost 2 million people gathered in one of Hong Kong's largest parks in what was an authorised, approved assembly from the authorities to voice their frustration at government. What was not approved was what happened next, when tens of thousands of those people spilled out of the park and formed a march that led towards government headquarters. The 9 activists have been charged with organising and inciting people to join that march and convicted on those charges. Their defence team tried to argue they were simply trying to initiate crowd control measures because of the large number of people who turned out, but the judge dismissed that defence and said she felt there was evidence that they were trying to provoke the crowds and escalate the level of the protest. This comes as a major blow to the pro-democracy movement. While these activists await sentencing in a couple of weeks' time, it further undermines any confidence that still exists among grassroots activism here that there may be chances in future to voice large-scale shows of public dissent and dissatisfaction towards the government. We've seen electoral reforms come into place in these past few days from Beijing that completely restructure the way that Hong Kong's electoral system customs work. Pro-democracy groups argue that this spells the beginning of the end for any meaningful form of opposition in Hong Kong's legislature. We've also had international criticism of these reforms from the US and the United Kingdom, both of whom are calling foul on Beijing for introducing such strict reforms well before the 50-year period in the joint declaration that the UK and China signed when Hong Kong was handed back to China that was supposed to ensure that Hong Kong maintained a high degree of autonomy. So further suggestions this week that it's going to be much harder in the coming months and years for the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement to have a meaningful and strong platform from which to voice their opposition to government. Richard Kimber in Hong Kong.
Let's talk about the Suez Canal. Divers inspected the hull of the Ever Given ship on Wednesday as the man tasked with investigating how the giant container ship ran aground, choking off international trade through the Suez Canal for almost a week, boarded the vessel. Lead investigator Captain Syed Jaishankar, who boarded the Ever Given, said the investigation would include examining the seaworthiness of the ship and its captain's actions to help determine the causes. Egypt's Suez Canal Authority on Thursday released drone footage of Ever Given ship days after it was freed from blocking the navigation in the key maritime passage for about 6 days. Divers inspected the hull of the Ever Given on Wednesday as the man tasked with investigating how the giant container ship ran aground, choking off international trade through the Suez Canal, boarded the vessel. The 6-day blockage threw global supply chains to disarray after a 400-meter-long ship became jammed diagonally across a southern section of this canal. And the shipping experts in Asia say that Suez Canal blockage may push the cost of cargo ship imports up by as much as 20%. Industry groups say the delays in deliveries will add further strain to the region's shippers, adding to the cost already incurred as a result of the COVID pandemic. Richard Kimber sent this report from Hong Kong's main cargo terminal.
Standing more than 8,000 kilometres away from the Suez Canal here in Hong Kong, but the impact of the blockage there is already having significant problems emerging here in the shipping industry. Hong Kong's Shipping Council says there will be at least a 3-week delay for any goods coming through the canal from Europe to Asia and a 3-week delay for any goods passing in the opposite direction. And it's important to understand how vital that canal is to Asia. It serves as the shortest and quickest trade route between the two continents and accounts for some 7% of the total volume of trade that passes through Hong Kong to reach Europe. The Chartered Institute of Logistics says that there will be a cost increase of up to 20% for imported goods coming into Hong Kong and throughout Asia, and that's on top of an already 4- to 5-fold increase that the shipping industry has experienced over the past 12 months because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's being felt not only by the shipping companies but also by the port behind me and of course all of the importers and distributors. There is some level of optimism from some of the main operators at the port here who say that because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic they're actually operating in a more streamlined capacity than ever and are therefore better able to cope with the challenges of a blockage in the Suez Canal than they might have been had it happened before the COVID-19 pandemic. But nevertheless, many of the big shipping companies here say that even though it's costing them some $8,000 per day to have their cargo ships sat idle on the other side of the Suez Canal, they're preferring to do that rather than send those ships on the longer and more costly journey and potentially more dangerous journey around the southern tip of Africa, which has the risk not only of potential piracy but also of the difficult sailing conditions there. And so despite the added cost of having those ships simply sat idle, they're placing all of their hopes on trying to get this blockage resolved as quickly as possible. Richard Kimber in Hong Kong.
India has condemned the violence in Myanmar. In his remarks in the closing meeting of the UN Security Council on Myanmar, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti, condoled over loss of lives and urged maximum restraint. He also reiterated India's steadfast commitment to democratic transition. The Indian envoy also demanded release of detained leaders. He welcomed ASEAN efforts. He added that the situation to be resolved peacefully. There is need for greater engagement, meet the hopes and aspirations of the people and extend assistance to the Rakhine State Development Program. The National Aerospace Lab CSIR, pioneers in India's civil aircraft design and development, rolled out Hansa NG at Bengaluru. It is a two-seater trainer aircraft made in India with advanced technology, and on the basis of test pilots' feedback aims to be a game changer in training commercial pilots in the country. The rollout of aircraft has now cleared the runway to start its test flights by the end of the year. A big leap by NAL towards Atmanirbhar vision, self-reliant vision in making indigenous advanced commercial aircraft at low cost that can also fly for 6 hours non-stop.
The rollout of the Hansa NG in the dazzling spotlights signalled India's arrival on the runway to self-reliance in the aerospace technology for the civil aviation sector. Hansa NG is an upgraded version of Hansa launched in 1993 and 11 flying clubs already in possession of the aircraft. The new generation version is equipped with smart avionics and the advanced features in its cockpit. This will cater to the demand for a trainer aircraft in India, which is still dependent on exporting such aircrafts. This Swadeshi trainer has already received 30 letters of intent from various flying clubs in the country, and HAL is all set to manufacture the aircrafts soon.
Once we had done a market survey, nobody was believed us that there is a real market. So we have a short film, but before that I will open up few things. So we did after market survey, we called people and then started making an aircraft and all, started working out the specification of aircraft. And then today you are surprised, I have 30 LOIs in hand.
The demand for training aircraft in the civil sector gained momentum since 2016, and India became the largest civil aviation market as the government opened up avenues such as the Udan scheme, connecting smaller towns and improving air connectivity.
I have with me Kunjal Bhatt, who is the chief flying instructor at the Indira Gandhi Udan Academy.
This is as our Honorable Prime Minister's mission Atmanirbhar Bharat. This is going to support it a lot, and by having our own Indian trainer, this type of aircraft, we will stop the students who are going abroad to do their commercial pilot license training, and will save a lot of revenue to the India. That revenue will stay with us, and we will able to, by 2024, the aim of our Prime Minister is to double the CPL. Right. So this is going to support that entire mission of double the CPL, and all the CPL holders should be trained within the India.
The DGCA has assured full support to the NAL and the HAL in their efforts to boost India's domestic flying sector.
The program has been going on extremely well. I agree with CMD HAL that we need to do much more. The SARAS program also is doing pretty well, and we do hope that we will be able to have SARAS commissioned in the field in about 2 years from now. We do hope that we receive support from the government for the RTA in the coming time.
Look forward to the new projects that we are coming up with in NAL along with HAL. One of them is, of course, the SARAS Mark II. So there are a lot of changes between SARAS Mark I and Mark II, and we hope that comes in fast and becomes a part of the Udan scheme. We hope that the activities with NAL being centric to it will become more faster and more number of activities as far as the civil aviation sector is concerned. And HAL definitely is behind them for supporting in the manufacturing sector.
The aircraft underwent several changes, and fabrication of the wings and other parts were done at the NAL in Bengaluru amidst the pandemic. Incidentally, the Centre for Civil Aircraft Design and Development at NAL was also renamed after Professor Rodham Narasimha, renowned Indian aerospace scientist who championed India's efforts to be a leading player in the civil aircraft design and development. Aisha Khanam's report from Bengaluru, DD India.
And some good news for sports lovers in England as outdoor sports resumes after lockdown rules have been eased. On Monday, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson officially lifted the stay-at-home order to allow the first phase of easing of the strict COVID lockdown, allowing for more outdoor activities, and called on people to remain cautious. London residents were thrilled to be allowed to play sports again, especially tennis.
London residents were thrilled to be allowed to play tennis again, as outdoor sports and leisure facilities were reopened as part of the British government's gradual easing of its lockdown restrictions. One keen tennis player in North London said that he and his family had booked sessions on the local courts throughout the first week.
We're here. The kids are eager, and yeah, we haven't played in ages, so everybody wants to get out there and get as much of it done as we can. We've got the entire week booked, so hopefully none of us lose a limb in the process. But it's not as easy coming back as it is continuing. But nothing hurts yet, so it's an hour into it, and see how it goes.
From Monday, up to 6 people or 2 households in England can meet outside, whilst outdoor sporting facilities such as swimming pools, tennis and basketball courts can be used with social contact limits in place. Despite the move, Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged continued caution due to rising coronavirus cases in Europe. Johnson announced a third national lockdown in England on January 4th, but has said he plans to proceed with a cautious and irreversible route out of restrictions, underpinned by a quick rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. That contrasts with much of Europe, with Germany and France among countries contending with a third wave of COVID-19 infections and hospitalizations. Johnson has also warned that coronavirus variants pose a risk to Britain's vaccine rollout, which is the 4th fastest in the world after Israel, United Arab Emirates and Chile. Hua Chim, treasurer, the national tennis manager at sports and leisure firm Better, said he was expecting high numbers of tennis players in the coming months, mirroring what happened in the wake of the first coronavirus lockdown in the summer of 2020.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough, kind of, you know, having our courts closed for so long. Having them closed for sort of the first 3 months of the year is very tough. We would ordinarily be quite busy, even though it's in the winter. We operate a lot of indoor tennis centres and a lot of indoor facilities. So then, actually, the winter is a very busy time for us. So it's been tough having them closed those first 3 months, but. You know, we saw such a big uplift of tennis participation last year when the kind of courts were open again and people could play last summer. We did see a lot of, a huge increase in people playing. So we're expecting that again these next kind of 2 months.
Prolonged closures have hurt sports and leisure businesses across the country, adding that preparations were now being made to reopen indoor venues on April 12th, should the government not delay the next stage of its reopening program. DD India.
The Stade de France, one of the key venues of the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games, will become a major COVID vaccination centre. The National Stadium is due to host matches during the 2023 Rugby World Cup in France, as well as staging the opening and closing ceremonies of the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games.
The French stadium that hosted World Cup finals in soccer and rugby is taking on a new role in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is preparing to become a vaccination centre. Workers at the Stade de France venue were putting up tents for the use as vaccination cubicles inside a hall in walls of the stadium that in pre-pandemic times was used to host conferences and VIP receptions. The Stade de France is due to host the final of the French Soccer Cup in May, the final of the domestic rugby competition in June, and a concert by US performer Lady Gaga in July. But these should be unaffected because the pitch and locker rooms are not part of the vaccination centre.
The advantage of a facility like the Stade de France is that you have enormous space inside, which allows you to install many vaccination stands while preserving social distancing. This is important. The health measures must be observed in the vaccination centers, and so big halls such as the ones offered in a facility like the Stade de France are useful. And in terms of circulation, we are capable of welcoming a lot of people here without them amassing in a crowd nor having to wait for a long time. So finally, it is very suitable for a vaccination center.
The stadium will start vaccinating people on April 6th. It is aiming to inoculate around 10,000 a week and will employ 150 staff each day, including students and jobless youth.
The objective is to vaccinate around 10,000 people per week, a little less than 2,000 per day over 6 operating days per week, and there will be around 150 people working on site each day.
The 80,000-seat Stade de France was the venue for the final match in the 1998 Soccer World Cup, won by the home team, and it also hosted the final game of 2007 Rugby World Cup, won by South Africa. The opening of the vaccination center at the stadium is part of the drive by French government to accelerate its vaccination program. Around 11% of the French population has been given at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Rolling out the vaccinations has become more urgent in France because the rate of infection is rising, and doctors say intensive care units in parts of the country are at risk of being overwhelmed by COVID-19 patients.
And let's now look at COVID pandemic-related updates from across the world in COVID Scan.
President Emmanuel Macron ordered France into a third national lockdown and said schools would close for 3 weeks as he sought to push back a third wave of COVID-19 infections that threatens to overwhelm hospitals. The restrictions already in place in Paris and some northern and southern regions now applies to the whole country for at least a month. The new measures will be in place for at least 1 month. Italy has imposed a mandatory 5-day coronavirus quarantine for people arriving or returning from trips to European Union countries until April 6. Travelers must also take a COVID-19 test at the end of the quarantine period. Similar measures were already in place for trips to countries outside the European Union. All over Italy, restaurants and bars can only serve takeaways as infections and deaths have risen. Spain tightens masks rules, making them mandatory in outdoor spaces like beaches and swimming pools, even if people follow the 1.5-meter social distancing rule. Currently, some regions require people to wear masks when arriving and departing from the beach, but not while sunbathing. Under the new regulation, people will not be allowed to remove their masks while at the beach. Sweden postpones a planned easing of some COVID restrictions until at least May 3, but tougher measures to get to grips with the surge in new infections are not needed at the moment. The government had planned to ease some of the rules, including raising the limit on the number of visitors to amusement parks, concerts and football matches after the Easter break. Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven called the situation serious as he asserted that the spread of the infection is too high a level. In Bangladesh, the COVID-19 infection continued to remain above 5,000 for the second consecutive day on March 31, with the total infection reaching 6.05 lakh. The country also saw 45 deaths in a row, taking the death toll to 8,994. The number of new COVID-19 infections over the last 2 days is the highest since the first corona-positive case was detected in Bangladesh last year.
Let's now go through some more news and updates from across the world in fast-forward mode.
The European Commission on Wednesday took the Polish government to the EU's top court for undermining the independence of judges and preventing them from applying EU law in Poland. The Commission also asked the EU court to order interim measures until it produces a ruling. The EU said the Polish law adopted in December 2019 was incompatible with the primacy of EU law and prevented Polish courts through disciplinary steps from directly applying EU law that protects judicial independence. The Commission has even asked the court to suspend the effects of decisions already taken by the disciplinary chamber and suspend the Polish law that prevents judges from directly applying EU law and from putting questions to the ECJ. Lebanon's Hezbollah movement on Wednesday said it was time for politicians to make concessions to agree a new government that must rescue the country from financial crisis. Lebanon's financial meltdown is posing serious threat to stability since the 1975-1990 civil war, but politicians have been unable to form a government for months. Prime Minister-designate Saad al-Hariri and President Michael Aoun, a political ally of Hezbollah, have been at loggerheads since October last year. A new cabinet will have to implement reforms if it is to unlock the much-needed foreign aid for Lebanon. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Wednesday said Moscow was concerned by mounting tensions in war-torn eastern Ukraine and that it feared Kyiv government forces could do something to restart a conflict with pro-Russian separatists. The comments of the Kremlin spokesman came a day after Ukraine's commander-in-chief accused Russia of a military build-up near their shared border and said the pro-Moscow separatists were systematically violating a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv and Moscow have blamed each other for a recent spate of violence in the region. Ukraine says around 14,000 people have been killed in the conflict since it first erupted in 2014. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday appealed to right-wing rivals to come back home and align themselves with him again to break a deadlock following the last week's inconclusive election. The final tally in Israel's fourth election in 2 years gave Netanyahu's conservative Likud party and kindred factions 52 seats in the 120-member parliament. A potential opposition bloc also was short of a governing majority with 57 seats. Israel President Reuven Rivlin, who has been tasked by law to choose a candidate to try to form a government, will begin meeting with political parties on Monday to hear their recommendations. He said he will pick a candidate by April the 7th. Leung Chun-ying, former chief executive of Hong Kong, said that the latest changes made to the electoral system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region will improve representation on the electoral board. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress earlier on Tuesday voted unanimously to adopt the amended First Annex and Second Annex to the Basic Law of the HKSAR to improve the electoral system of the Special Administrative Region. The two annexes concern the method for the selection of the HKSAR Chief Executive and the method for the formation of the HKSAR Legislative Council and its voting procedures respectively. Mexico's sleepy resort town of Tulum is under the international spotlight for all the wrong reasons after the weekend killing of a Salvadoran woman in Mexican police custody who died after a female officer was seen in a video kneeling on her back. President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador said 36-year-old Victoria Salazar Ariza had been subject to brutal treatment and murdered after her detention on Saturday by 4 police officers. Indonesia's Transport Ministry on Wednesday said that it had recovered the cockpit voice recorder of a Sriwijaya airjet that crashed into the Java Sea shortly after takeoff on January 9th, killing all 62 people on board. Authorities unveiled the CVR to the media at a news conference in Jakarta on Wednesday. A preliminary report by investigators into the Sriwijaya crash had said that the plane had an imbalance in engine thrust that eventually led the plane into a sharp roll and then a final dive into the sea. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Time now to turn the time machine. Importance of this week in history.
It was on this day in 1961 when Nelson Mandela, along with several others, were acquitted after a 4.5-year trial. Mandela and scores of other people were charged with high treason. Mandela and the last 27 remaining accused were acquitted of the charges, after which he went underground. It was on March 29th in 2017 when the United Kingdom invoked Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union, beginning its withdrawal from the European Union, commonly known as Brexit. On 30th March 1796, German mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss discovered the construction of heptadecagon. He, who was a child prodigy, is sometimes referred to as the Prince of Mathematicians and the greatest mathematician since antiquity. On this day in 1842, American surgeon Dr. Crawford Williamson Long for the first time used ether anesthesia in an operation. During the surgery, the physician removed a tumor from the neck of a man. On March 31st in 1889, the Eiffel Tower in Paris officially opened. After climbing 1,710 steps that led to the top of the tower, people unfurled the French flag to the sound of a 21-gun salute. The Eiffel Tower remained the world's highest construction until the Chrysler Building was erected in New York in 1930. People from all over the world gathered in the city of Paris to have a look at this masterpiece. After 36 years in existence, the Warsaw Pact, which was the military alliance between the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellites, ended in 1991. The action was yet another sign that the Soviet Union was losing control over its former allies and the Cold War was falling apart. The Warsaw Pact was formed in 1955 primarily as a response to the decision by the United States and its Western European allies to include a re-armed West Germany in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Stories now from a more intimate world around us. Stories that move, stories that inspire, stories beyond headlines.
With foreign tourists kept away from the historic city of Bruges, chocolate maker Dominique Persuni is counting on his fellow Belgians' taste for the unusual to boost business in the run-up to Easter. Among the spring specials he concocted ahead of the festival, the former chef is particularly proud of a praline made of grass juice, Smith apple and yuzu, an East Asian type of lemon. On a spring day, the picturesque city of Bruges, crisscrossed with canals, is normally humming with foreign tourists, but plummeting visitor numbers have taken their toll on many of the shops in town. However, Persuni is hopeful and says that his chocolate contains a secret ingredient that has the power to counter the lockdown blues, a sentiment echoed by customers. A stray cat took her sick kittens to a local veterinary clinic run by Karabagla municipality in Turkey's western province of Izmir. When the cat first walked into the clinic with one of her kittens, veterinarians didn't understand her motive. The cat mewed for a long time after bringing in the second kitten. The stray feline and her kittens were placed in adoption after the completion of their treatment. In Nigeria, a 50-year-old businesswoman has gone back to school. Wearing a pink dress and bonnet, which is her school uniform, Shade Ajoyi sits in class alongside kids nearly 4 decades younger than she is. This is the first time in her life that she has stepped inside a classroom. A businesswoman by profession, making and selling purses and bags, Ajoyi says that she is not ashamed of starting school at the age of 50 and wants to be an example for people who have missed out on education. It's that time again. The slender stalks in white or green are being pulled out of the ground in Bavaria. This is done traditionally and by hand on this day, which requires plenty of harvest support, and that in times of pandemic. The provisions against the spread of the virus are expressed in strict hygiene regulations on site, which have a strong impact on this year's sting, reports Peter Strobl from the Asparagus Producers Association in southern Bavaria. A 74-year-old pensioner, Vladimir Sedokov from Russia's Yekaterinburg, is on his way to cover himself in tattoos top to toe. A fan of poetry and paintings, Sedokov wears incredibly crafted costumes. Sedokov has so far brought the count of his tattoos to 60 and does not plan to stop. His skin is covered with a mixture of cartoons, demons, mythical animals and poetry lines. Sedokov also runs a blog which is full of fun videos in which he usually dances, sings, dares people for boxing and takes his goat for a tram ride. A zoological park in western France has recently welcomed a baby red howler monkey as a result of growing conservation efforts for the threatened species. The baby monkey, which was born on February 16 at Planète Sauvage Zoo, has been tentatively named Shango. Currently the top choice in an online poll the park had launched upon the young male's birth. The International Union of Conservation of Nature last week identified the red howler monkey in its red list of threatened species. A restored 15th century Flemish masterpiece that has been painted over, partly stolen and hidden by the Nazis, gained a new bulletproof glass housing in Belgium this week, part of a €30 million revamp for visitors, completed in 1432 by brothers Jan and Hubert van Eyck. The painting, named Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, is an altarpiece of 12 detailed panels that is widely considered one of the most important pieces of early Renaissance art. Visitors will have to pass through a crypt before viewing the panels, kept inside an adaptive glass case. Augmented reality glasses and tablets will relate the panel's 600-year history. The famous cherry blossom trees of Washington, D.C. have reached full bloom, drawing crowds to marvel at their white and pink flowers. The trails remained open on Monday despite warnings from the National Park Service that access would be shut down if crowds become unmanageable. The warnings may have had an effect, since crowds showed up but did not pack the paths as they had in previous years. Peak bloom usually lasts 4 to 7 days and was first reached last week. Thousands of worshippers in Iraqi town of Bakdida in the Christian district of Hamdaniya celebrated Palm Sunday, which begins the Holy Week celebrations for Christians ending with Easter. A procession led by priests toured Bakdida, with children and adults alike celebrating, chanting and marching to mark the occasion, as some wore face masks. Nearly 25,000 people participated in the celebrations. The Catholic community in Berlin celebrated pre-Easter Palm Sunday with a church service on Sunday under corona conditions. The visitors to the St. Bonifacius Church had to register themselves in contact lists before the service and keep the mask and distance requirement during the service. Pastor Oliver Cornelius expressed concern that due to the steady increasing numbers of infections, attendance at church services would soon no longer be possible. In Spain's Barcelona, around 5,000 music fans attended the sold-out concert for Spanish indie band Love of Lesbian after taking rapid COVID-19 tests. The tests spared them from maintaining social distancing. However, attendees had to wear face masks throughout the concert in the Palau Sant Jordi Arena. Pre-concert testing was offered at 3 locations in the city, carried out by 80 nurses wearing full personal protective equipment. Some winced as nurses swabbed their noses. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And with that, we conclude this edition of Global Scan. We leave you with these images that define the news stories this week. Take a look. Namaskar.